the thing with the old ladies is them being murderers does not change the fact that they are extremely sweet-natured, because they are.
Well, I must be going.
Charge! Charge the blockhouse!
Welcome back to Great American Movie Review, where we review great American movies.
My name is Kyle.
And I'm Mikiah. This is a Movie of the Week style podcast where we take turns picking films and we have a casual discussion about their context and their quality. This is an audio show in its primary function, so you can find us on podcasting apps, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts if you prefer to take us on the go. But yeah, Arsenic and Old Lace is a film from 1944. It follows the character Mortimer Brewster, played by Cary Grant, who, before leaving for his honeymoon, finds out that his sweet-natured aunts are actually insane serial killers, and then shenanigans ensue.
I love that phrase.
Yeah. It's maybe as much of a shenanigans ensue, like there's a lot of shenanigans that ensue in this case.
Quite a few.
Yes. But the film, directed by Frank Capra, is based on the 1941 play of the same name by Joseph Kesserling. While it was originally filmed in 1941 alongside the release of the play, it was only planned for release after the play's Broadway run. Ah, man, I can't speak. Broadway. Okay, let me say only. Okay, only after the play's Broadway.
It's a tongue twister.
Only after the film's Broadway won.
You still can't say it.
I can't get it.
Okay, Mikiah, I'll take over. After the film's Broadway run.
It was it ended up being way more successful than they even thought it was going to be. So that run didn't end until 1944.
Right.
And the film did not get nominated for any awards things, despite what you might find on some websites. If you just Googled, did Arsenic and Old Lace get nominated for Oscars? I just wanted to say a quick shout out to the website for Little Theatre of Manchester at Cheney Hall for getting literally every piece of information that they could get wrong about this movie wrong.
Nice.
So don't trust a lot of websites on this, because I saw multiple that were saying this is like a much nominated film in the Academy Awards.
That's a skill in its own right, getting everything wrong. So props to you.
Yes, absolutely. They had the date wrong. They had everything wrong. But either way,
you said it was filmed in 1941. That's interesting to me, because they talk about like everything going strange in Brooklyn ever since they won the pennant. But They did win the pennant in 1941. So that's why I was so confused. It was like 1944, but like Brooklyn wasn't good in 1944 and 1943. Yeah. So I thought that was weird.
Yeah, it's interesting too for the timing. This is our first 1940s film. That's why I picked this movie. I wanted to pick something from the 40s. So this was one that's been on my list for a long time. I just haven't gotten around to it, but I popped in the disc and yeah, I had a blast with this. But how did you feel about it, just like in a general way?
I agree. At the beginning, it's a little bit much to get into, because obviously the 1940s and that style of filmmaking is just so different than today, or even like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It's so much different. But I will say, once it goes back to the Brewster house, it's basically, the comedy is timeless.
Oh, yeah.
The comedy is so great. This is the first movie from the 30s, 40s, 50s that kind of does comedy that in a way that feels like it could connect to today's generation.
Yeah, I think that it comes in an interesting place too, because like I said, it was filmed in 1941. It was actually the last week of filming where Pearl Harbor happened.
Yeah, and December 7th was when Pearl Harbor happened. So
yeah, so the last like week of filming, Cary Grant got to finish. Frank Capra went into the war.
Right.
And so like it was a lot of like the tension around 1940s film is really the film that came out during wartime. Right. Because what did World War II start in like 1939?
World War II started in Europe in 1939.
Yeah.
The U.S. until 1941 was very isolationist, so we were sending ships and money over and weapons via the Lend-Lease Act, but we got into the war basically at the start of 1942, and it ended in 1945. Both end of April was the end of the war, or beginning of May, first week of May was the end of the war in Europe, and then August, the second week of August, was the end of the war totally in Japan.
Right. So we talked about with like Adventures of Robin Hood, some of the newsreel stuff, where like they were talking about stuff that was happening, but it was still pre-war in the late 30s. So 30s film was not wartime film, but 40s really is. Like the world at war had such an impact on the industry as a whole.
I was going to say that this does feel like a film that they would show for like USO, or they would show it for troops about to be deployed in Operation Overlord in 1944 when they actually landed on the beaches of Normandy, France. So it's kind of interesting seeing probably something that they would see, because dark black comedy is probably right up the alley of what the US would attain to entertain the troops right before going to war.
Yeah, and I mean, that's dominating the 40s in a lot of ways, were these kind of comedies. You also had the emergence of musical films, although that kind of blew up more, I would say, in the late 40s to the 50s. Right. But it's definitely like this kind of farce, though, was very popular at this period of time through the 30s and then into the 40s, especially when people were looking to get away from, you know, the burden of living in the era of World War II.
It's also kind of funny seeing, because one of the characters is famously, he's essentially playing an insane man who believes that he's the president of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt. So it's interesting seeing that only 30 years after Roosevelt's presidency, how they thought of him, not so much as like an insane man, but as like a man who was very much larger than life. Theodore Roosevelt, bar none, had the craziest life of all presidents of the United States. Sure. So it's interesting seeing a take on that in a way that's like, look how crazy this man is, but most of those things happened that he was talking about. He did split Panama in half, essentially. He did go hunting later in his life.
I could be wrong about this, but I think Martin Scorsese is making a Teddy Roosevelt movie with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Leonardo DiCaprio. That is still in the works. I think it's still very much in like a pre-production.
Right. That might be his next movie. I think it is.
I can't wait for it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm all for that, especially like somebody like Martin Scorsese taking that on. Like, I'm really curious to see his take on something like that, but because he really is a larger than life figure in every possible way.
It is. Yeah, it is quite funny how little we have on TR. Theodore Roosevelt, as he actually wanted to be called. He didn't like the nickname Teddy, which is also funny because they call him Teddy throughout the movie,
and just throughout history.
Absolutely.
That's just how we refer to him.
I enjoy the concepts that are happening in this movie that really shine a light on things that were occurring in the 40s, were being made up in the 40s, and were celebrated in the 50s and 60s. It's kind of interesting to me, because this was the greatest generation.
Yeah. And Frank Capra is one of the most iconic film directors, just period. If you don't know, his most famous films are It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Which is the only movie I've seen from him.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Mr. Smith Goes to Washington specifically.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great film. I'm a little contrarian in that I don't love It's a Wonderful Life like everybody else seems to, but I do love Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and a number of other films. He was most popular in the 30s, I would say, even though It's a Wonderful Life came out in 46, but that was his like one big hit after that. But he also had the Best Picture winning film, It Happened One Night. He was really known for these kind of moralistic, feel-good movies that, weirdly, he seemed to have some draw to some macabre elements. So it's interesting to see that come out here. But apparently the reason that he was really drawn to doing Arsenic and Old Lace was because he was excited to do a movie that wasn't morality based, didn't have any messages. It's kind of what he was kind of thinking about it, which is true. I mean, this movie's like, it's a big farcical goofball screwball comedy, is what it is.
There are no good people here.
it's just situational comedy to the max. Because okay, so you got Cary Grant's character. He just got married. All of this stuff that happens at the very beginning of the movie, by the way, not from the play. That was the movie's way of expanding the world of it. A common thing that you see in play to movie adaptations, but in this way, it's really just that opening. That with like the baseball game and the title cards, which is kind of how Frank Capra opens some of his movies anyway. And the whole thing at the wedding, or where they get married at that line, which that whole scene feels very
the local
Capra.
clerk's office, basically.
Yeah, that whole scene feels very Capra because it has kind of that crowd element. It's also very ethnically diverse comparatively to most other types of films that you'd see at the time, which that was something.
Well, it was New York in the 40s. Probably the most diverse place in the world.
Yeah. So Capra will actually present that, unlike other popular film directors at the time. That's like a notable thing with him. But he was an immigrant. He's Sicilian. Mm-hmm. So it is kind of interesting seeing him have that there. But then the rest of this movie being a stage play is so contained to its singular location. But yeah, once he gets married to Elaine
Harper.
Yes, Elaine Harper, and who's played by Priscilla Lane.
Come on, man, you got to get up on this.
So they get married. They go back to they go back. He's going to take her on the honeymoon. Yeah. So he goes back to the Brewster house, which is his two aunts they've never married or anything. They just live together. And they're sweet old ladies. And
they've captured quite a few elderly gentlemen, if you think about it. They could very easily get married. It's just that they all end up dying. I don't understand.
Well, here's the thing. It's because they're absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Because he finds out that there's a body. And the thing with the old ladies is them being murderers does not change the fact that they are extremely sweet-natured. Because they are. They are extremely sweet and extremely honest about what they've done. It's
sure,
just
they killed a few people, but they're so kind, though.
Right. Nobody just would suspect what they had done because they're so sweet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even the way that they kill the people. So they get these old men who they think are really lonely. And they're like, well, they have no family left. They're just really old. We're just doing them a good service,
Yeah, it's basically the 40s take on euthanasia without necessarily a terminal illness.
Right, which, during that period of time does kind of have an interesting commentary because just like all the stuff going on with Nazism and all that stuff, especially with the Dr. Einstein character, too, coming in there. Being this German scientist who's doing experiments in plastic surgery.
The most stereotypical German scientist who happens to be a surgeon. Yeah.
Right. But the two women, what's her name? Man, I'm dropping the ball on names. I believe. But Josephine Hall and Jean Adair play Abby and Martha Brewster.
And they are the two that are from the play, right, on Broadway?
Them and the guy who plays Teddy is John Alexander.
Oh, right.
He's also from the play.
He's my favorite person in this, I swear. He is so good as Teddy.
Yeah, and honestly, but this might be my favorite Cary Grant performance too, despite the fact that apparently Cary Grant hates this performance because he thinks it's too over the top.
It is quite manic, I'll say. I'll agree, it's a little bit out of place. Not that it's bad. It's just it's a little bit out of place where if I was watching like the Broadway version of this, his performance would definitely be just that little bit out of place. It works much better for film because you can get up close and get all in his face. And obviously he's what do they call it? He's like making stares and breaking the fourth wall to the camera so often in the second and third act.
Right.
He basically becomes Jim from The Office.
Right. His whole character is just getting like he's trying to leave for this honeymoon, and then he finds out this piece of information that changes his whole perspective on his whole family, basically.
Yeah. Well, he knew his brother, Jonathan, was crazy. He knows that John Alexander's character, Teddy Roosevelt Brewster, is crazy. And so he thought that, and obviously he doesn't have a mother or father figure anymore. So he just thought that the two remaining fragments of his family would be sane because they appear sane until they discuss things that are what they do.
So he just kind of like is in this state of like shock through the whole movie.
Movie.
Yeah, because he starts pushing Elaine away. Like, oh no, I just gotta like. It's like we gotta like figure stuff out. And he just pushes her out the door basically, and she's just like trying to like get back in. Like, what's happening? What's going on? I just want to know what's happening. Aren't we leaving for our honeymoon? Didn't you just say you'd be a minute?
But Niagara Falls. We'll leave it then.
But what I love
That's
about this
favorite.
movie, what I love about this movie is that Mortimer's goal throughout the movie is to get Teddy out of there,
right?
Because Teddy is completely innocent in all of this.
Because that'll solve it.
Yeah, Teddy's always been crazy. He's always known Teddy's been crazy. Teddy has adopted a different persona, and he's just like, I just need to get Teddy into what's the type of place?
Happy
What's
Dale.
it called? Happy Dale's the name
Happy
of the
Dale.
place.
It's basically a mental institution.
Right, a mental institution. Yeah, he's just trying to
which
get
was
him
one
in
of the
there.
most dangerous places to be in the 40s.
Right, in the 40s, in context of the 40s, that's not a great resolution for that character to end up in Happy Dale's. But for the sake of this movie, like they painted the way that they painted it, I'm like, okay, that like he's doing something honorable and trying to get him out of there so that he doesn't end up getting the brunt of the consequences for this.
I thought it was the opposite. I thought he was supposed to be the fall guy.
Teddy?
Like he's getting Teddy out of there. And obviously he's not going to do anything about his aunts. I think he's just in denial that his aunts would do something like this. So he thinks Teddy is the reason for all of it.
Oh, no, I thought he was just trying to get Teddy out because Teddy's an innocent in this and shouldn't be caught up in it. That's what I thought that was going on with that the whole time.
Huh. You may be right.
I just thought he was really desperate to get Teddy out of there. Until this is what happens in these types of comedies, though. It's all about like the way that the B plot comes in and just really interrupts everything. Because then you get his brother Jonathan making a reappearance, which when he first showed up, I was like, oh, they're doing the Frankenstein thing. And I was like, did they get Boris Karloff to do this?
No.
I said that out loud. And I was like, a second later, once I saw a better shot of his face, I was like, oh, no, it's not Boris Karloff.
Yeah.
And then it's a running gag, though, apparently, that
You look exactly like
looks
Boris Karloff, yeah.
Which in the stage play, though, it was Boris Karloff. And they wanted to get Boris Karloff for the movie, but apparently they couldn't. Because I guess on stage, there's nobody.
They couldn't get him out of his contract.
Right. There's nobody to replace Boris Karloff, and they weren't willing to get him out of his contract.
I mean, Raymond Massey, that's how you say his name, right?
Massey, I think.
Massey?
Massey.
Ray,
I don't know,
probably
way.
Massey. Massey is more 1940s now.
I've known a few people with the last name Massey, so I think it has to be Massey.
Yeah, so Raymond Massey does a fine job. It's somehow a little bit reserved from what I imagine Frankenstein, especially the 30s Frankenstein would be. He's doing his best. That's about it.
I agree.
You can't all be Boris Karloff.
I know. I think that the fact that it could have been Boris Karloff, it taints it a little bit because I'm like, oh, that would have been so good if it was actually Boris Karloff.
Keeping in that same vein, we've talked about the Hays Code multiple times, but
yes.
The story is quite a bit was cut even when it was filmed, and quite a bit was changed specifically for the Hays Code. So in the end, when Mortimer finds out that spoilers, by the way, when Mortimer finds out that he's not actually a Brewster and he's the son of a sea cook or whatever he says, he wasn't supposed to say, I'm not a Brewster, I'm the son of a sea cook. He's supposed to say, I'm not a Brewster, I'm a bastard. But they wouldn't allow him to.
Oh yeah,
and they also they also had scene shots of the upstairs rooms where the aunts slept, Mortimer's room, or what would have been Mortimer's room, and the grandfather's study. There were shots of the cellar as well, but they all cut that out mostly because of the Hays Code. So it feels like a missed opportunity for this. And it, in a way, it constrains it to a little bit more of like what I would imagine a play would be. But even then in the play, there would have been shots or there would have been like changing of scenery.
Right.
But in this, it's just all contained in that one house and a little bit outside.
Yeah. Which that set outside.
Saddens me.
Yeah,
no, it just saddens me.
Yeah, that set outside is really impressive, though, with like the forced perspective that they use.
Yeah. And
like the backdrop with the bridge, and then like
because they have to get it's the river.
Yeah. Some of
one
those
the rivers.
gravestones, though, like towards the front of the camera, are just really small. They're just using a lot of forced perspective on the
Also, the one he
soundstage.
sits on is tiny, and like
Right,
that's
right.
rude. Sitting on an epitaph or sitting on a tombstone, that's rude.
Yeah, but this does have, I think it leans into a lot of horror qualities from the time. I think if you were watching this back then, especially, you would feel some of that horror more so, because the whole Frankenstein image, I mean, this was right when those Universal monsters were in full swing.
Yeah, this was their prime.
Right. So this is, as far as horror goes, what it's presenting here in those dark areas of the film are what horror films are at the time, which they reference even, like one of the aunts says, oh, those horrible films or something like that you see at the theater. I don't know, they're just making these things to scare people or whatnot.
Yeah, I remember a couple of shots of Jonathan Brewster will be in the background and it'll just be his shadow like looming over Dr. Einstein. And like as soon as like a shadow changes or like something changes in the shot, you'll see Dr. Einstein react to it and then just become more submissive. It's kind of nice.
This film uses that kind of chiaroscuro that like film noir uses. Like we talked about.
You can say that, but you can't say Broadway.
I can't say Broadway run. Except for right now.
You said it. He did the thing.
The chiaroscuro that we talked about a bit with Night of the Hunter, and when you got more into noir style films, how those blacks and the contrast, the heavy contrast, this film has aspects of that, which is interesting because Capra never really leaned into that later on in other films, despite having, some interest in suicide and other kind of macabre ideals in his film. Like that's the whole premise of It's a Wonderful Life. Mm-hmm. Even during the Hays Code period. I mean, his films always have this kind of Americana, like this nice kind of American dream idealization to them. This film being an exception from that, but it still has that ending that feels like a Hays Code period ending. Because in another era, you may have made this film and had the Mortimer character go to the crazy house with everybody else.
I mean, if this was made in any other era, pre-Hays Code or post, everyone would be dead, more than likely. Especially in the hands of like the Saw franchise or something like that.
Yeah, I was stressed though. I was like, is Mortimer going to end up going to the thing? And then I kept forgetting. I'm like, no, this is a Hays Code era film. There's no way that this doesn't end on a happy ending.
It was still just in the back of my mind because obviously I knew kind of the years of the Hays Code. But I'm impressed with the hypocrisy of the Hays Code because they'll show some scary things like the one jump scare of Jonathan Brewster coming through the window.
It's an effective jump scare. I jumped at it
because jump scare.
I was like, whoa, it scared me. So that's where this is maybe an earlier example of like a genuine horror comedy. Like for the time, for what horror was at the time, this kind of fits in that mold to some extent. There is tension in this film, and it's not like Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
They do have baseball, so maybe they found out who was on first.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
yeah,
this is kind of an odd role for Cary Grant because, like I said, he's much more known for his more measured, kind of suave persona in film. And so having this kind
of get that at the beginning.
You do.
But
you do.
That goes right out the window.
It really is the second that he learns this information. He like goes into shock and he just plays this like Looney Tunes ass role from that point on. He's just reacting.
Yeah, phone will be ringing. He'll just pick up his hand and just go, hello. Oh, yeah. Right.
So he has some of my favorite expressions that I've ever seen in a film in this movie. I'm like, this dude's got like a rubber face for like somebody who keeps it pretty still most of the time in a lot of his other films. He's got a lot of like character and what he's able to do with his face in this movie that adds to the comedy in a big way.
His face is very smushy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's also interesting too because it's got this the aunts, as polite as they are, they kind of have they still have their like prejudice because so Jonathan's there and with Dr. Einstein played by Peter Lorre, who is great. Peter Lorre is an iconic actor from the time. If you've seen any amount of 40's films, I mean, he's in Casablanca, he's in M, The Maltese Falcon, The Man
He's
Who
in
Knew
M,
Too
which
Much.
obviously, oddly enough, I have seen.
Yeah, The Raven, Around the World in 80 Days, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He's in so many films. You've seen this
Whenever
guy.
they needed someone of foreign descent, he would be there.
Right, basically. And he's got these, like, his eyes are just perfect for, like, the types of roles that he ends up playing a lot of the time.
Yeah, they call him pop-out eyes in the movie.
Yeah, so he's kind of playing this almost Igor character to Jonathan's Dr. Frankenstein / actual Frankenstein.
/ actual Frankenstein. Yeah.
And he's just drunk through the whole thing, just like he's always drinking out of his flask, and he's just trying to get
hold on
away.
to his schnapps.
Yeah, he's just trying to get out of this situation at this point.
Yeah, apparently he's been just with Jonathan for like 13 murders.
Right.
Which is weird.
But they have another one of their murders in the car. And so the two old ladies have been keeping their murder subject in the, I guess, what is it called?
Mr. Hoskins, I believe.
Mr. Hoskins, yes. He's in the chest underneath the windowsill, basically.
Yeah, he's in the window.
I forgot what that thing is called, like, just in life. I don't remember what that...
A window chest is good enough, I think.
If people listening, if they've seen it, they'll know what we mean.
It's under a window and it's a chest.
It's usually where you'd keep blankets and there's a cushion on top typically, and you can sit on it and store things in it. But either way, that's where Mr. Hoskins is. But there's this whole thing where Jonathan's there and he doesn't know about the dead body, and Mortimer's trying to not let him know about the dead body because Jonathan's an actual, like, murderer, psychopath himself,
and yet he's the sanest person in the movie, which is crazy
to some extent
in and of itself.
Because he's got his clear objective, and he's not like, he has no issues with the fact that what he's doing is wrong. He knows what he's doing is wrong, and he's doing it anyway. Yeah,
which is like the opposite of what psychopaths usually do.
Right. So, but he has his own dead body that he's trying to dispose of. They let Teddy...
He's got his own dead body. It's look who's coming to dinner, but look who's not coming to dinner because they're dead.
Right. They got Teddy. So because he's doing the Teddy Roosevelt thing, he digs the Panama Canal. And whenever he digs the Panama Canal, he just digs a grave for them in the basement cellar, basically.
One notch at a time, man.
Yep.
He's up to 12 now.
Yep. So
don't worry, he'll split that country in half.
Yeah, so Jonathan and Einstein find that grave that's been dug but hasn't been filled yet, and they're like, we can hide our body here. It's perfect.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
How that hole is just perfectly sized for Mr. Spinalzo.
Right.
Isn't it so great?
But because he's Mr. Spinalzo, this like fake Italian name, whatever they came up with for that, but it's some, foreign, could be Sicilian name even. It's an interesting thing where they're like, we don't want to bury the foreigner with our, like, nice, white Christian men.
I love the line. Was it Mr. Hoskins? Mr. Hoskins, he's good looking for a Methodist.
Right.
Like, what the hell does that mean?
They're even judgmental about his, like, denomination, but as long he's still a Christian though, so it's okay.
Oh, he's a Baptist.
Right. So many just like funny lines, and I love just like the deliveries too, and especially from Cary Grant in this situation, like when he finds out more about the murders, and they're just the two aunts just like flat with everything they say, because they're just like, it's just matter of fact, Yeah. They're like, oh, what happened to him? And she goes, he died.
They don't see it as wrong, they see it as mercy. And that's what a psychopath would think. Like, Jonathan's like, what the hell is going on here? I'm the psychopath here, but no, the aunts are actual psychopaths because what they believe they're doing, killing people, is mercy.
Yeah, but once Mortimer finds out that they're actually putting poison in the glasses and actively poisoning these people, he goes, it's first degree. And there's some funny stuff.
Oh, what about the others?
Yeah.
Others?
There's also the police element here, where there's just like the police do their rounds, and Teddy blows this bugle. Teddy blows this bugle, which has been a problem with the neighbors. So they get the cops called on them somewhat regularly, and they're always checking in because they know there's a crazy person there, basically. And so the cops keep like coming in at different points, and there's points where Mortimer wants the cops to find out, about Jonathan's body, but then he doesn't want the cops to find out once Jonathan knows about the other body. It's just like layers
mutually
on layers
assured
of these
destruction, but family version of mutually assured destruction.
Yeah. And there's just all of these like goings on. And then there's a point though where Mortimer is just sick of it, and he's just like up on the stairs, and he's just like laying on the stairs, basically just commenting on things. There's even an off-screen piece of dialogue where a character like fixes a wine glass that's toppled over, and you just hear Mortimer goes, he stops to do that. Like just in the background, it's not even on camera. Just like stuff like that. He's just like commenting. He's just like I'm so just worn out trying to get this thing, trying to get Teddy into this place, and Teddy won't even sign his real name, so he can't actually go. And like,
well, yeah,
like
he
that.
thinks he's Teddy Roosevelt.
Right.
He's gonna sign it as Teddy
So
Roosevelt.
he's trying to convince Teddy to sign the documents with his real name by convincing him that it's code. There's just so much going on in this movie comedically. It's like
crows, and where do you hunt in Africa? In the Veld.
Yeah.
It crows in the Veld. Oh.
Yeah, there's so much going on in this film. From a comedic standpoint, the way that they layer it in is just so impressive to me. It had my stomach hurting from both laughter and just like the tension of it. So yeah, but
I'd have to go back and read the script from Kesserling, because I wonder how much the screenwriters actually changed. I can't imagine it's a lot, except for the fact that they had to take away some of the shots that they were going to do in different rooms.
Yeah,
but it'd be interesting to see like a recreation of that,
right,
like, at TPAC, which would be the closest place to us to see plays if they would come back with it. I would very much enjoy that.
I mean, I've seen it be put on in like a lot of colleges and high schools and stuff still. I think it's a pretty fun one to do. Never having actually seen the play myself, this movie feels very faithful to what the play would have to be, which is always cool. Like,
yeah, it very much is, because it's a small set. It very much is like the set of a play, but you can get close with cameras. That's about it.
Right. I'm not always the biggest fan of when they take a play and adapt it to film and then keep it so contained, so stage-like. But there was already, I think in classic film, though, it's a little bit different because there's already that quality to classic film to some extent. That you, like, it's not that much of a departure from what the medium was at the time. You know, like I think of something like Fences, the Denzel Washington directed version of that play. And it's a good film. It is. I'm not going to say anything against that, but I don't like get as invested in it when it feels so stagey to me, even though it's definitely based on a stage play and they're playing it very true to source, you know. It just kind of is what it is. It doesn't draw me in cinematically as much. Whereas something like this, I think being from the era that it's in and having, you know, already, you know, not being as far off from what other films were, it's not as much of a barrier for me getting into it. But this movie marked or it didn't mark actually, but Capra this is in the studio system very firmly for the time. So Capra was known for his contract with Columbia, which he was at Columbia for 12 years, which back then, if you have 12 years of film with the studio, then you're putting out at least one film a year, usually 2 or maybe even 3. So it's kind of interesting that he did get to become this kind of like get away from the studio system. Same with Cary Grant. Cary Grant never was attached to a single studio. He was one of the few actors in that period that really got to be a free agent and just kind of go where he wanted to.
So this is a total non sequitur because I wanted to look at the differences. The main difference, if you want the play spoiled, but then again,
that's fine.
Probably doesn't matter because I'm gonna probably be looking at the script anyway, so I'll be finding out eventually. So in the play, Mr. Witherspoon, who is the Happy Dale sanitarium caretaker, is poisoned with the glass of wine accidentally, like he poisons himself. So they kept that in, I believe, but preview audiences didn't like that. So they changed it to where everyone lives.
Right. Nobody dies on screen in this film.
No, and there's not even a dead body ever shown.
Right.
They keep it to the the kind of clever cinematography and also just clever lighting of not having light at all to there's like the silhouette of a body that Teddy Brewster brings down to the cellar.
Right, you see it.
He totally falls down the stairs. He totally falls down the stairs.
That's done where they turn off all the lights because they did this whole thing where they're like, we're gonna like have him take the body down while we pretend to go to bed, basically, because Jonathan was insisting that they go to bed so that he could move his body in.
But then that gets put in the window chest.
Right. Then that gets put in the window chest. And then when Mortimer looks in the window chest again and he sees that's a completely different body, he has a whole other reaction to it. Like, well, why is this another body? He's
not even angry like, oh my God, not another dead body. He's like, I can't believe they let another person in the house.
Right. Yeah, and that's where you get him trying to like rat out Jonathan, because Jonathan still at that point doesn't even know about the whole body.
And he doesn't know about the other 11
Mr.
bodies.
Hoskins, I mean.
Bob Hoskins.
Bob Hoskins.
The ants must have seen the Super Smash or Super Mario Brothers movie.
Oh man,
that means John Leguizamo was not too far off. He was the next. Whatever his name is. Luigi from Super Mario Brothers.
If you want to know another interesting weird thing from the time, Jewish actors, specifically Jewish comics, were not used very heavily in films at all during the wartime period because they didn't want to give the Nazis, quote, like ammunition, basically, to like.
Well, it's not only that. The UK and the US specifically were like second and third when it came to anti-Semitism in the 30s.
Yeah.
I mean, we turned away a ship full of hundreds of Jews seeking refuge from the war in 1939 anyway.
Yeah.
Just because they were Jewish.
Yeah.
No other reason. So it's kind of a thing where like Jews were persecuted against even in the United States, even when we were helping them.
Yeah.
So
the world being the world being at that place is not great. Obviously, but like one, you have World War II going on and the whole thing with the Nazis is anti-Jew. And then in the US, you have this idea that because you are representing Jews that might be playing like Jewish people who might be playing characters that are silly, that would be one enough to consider it ammunition is already a bad place to be in the world. But and also the fact that you are kind of giving into it by not having that kind of exposure. I don't know. It's all messed up. It's all just totally messed up.
Yep.
But there's an article that was written for the Criterion release by David Cairns, who is a famous film historian. And it's a wonderful article. And he talks about how there's one particular actor that throughout that time period, and Frank Capra in particular used, where he would get like inserts of like hands and like feet and stuff like that so that he could keep having steady work. Mm-hmm. Just kind of an interesting and unfortunate period of time with that kind of representation. But yeah, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about specifically with the film?
Not particularly. Like, not anything specifically that I was going to bring up.
Yeah. All right. Well, then we can move into the scoring if you want.
Very good.
All right. The way we do it on our show, same as always. We do 0 to 2. 0 being anything that we considered not good, below average. 1 being good, 2 being great. We keep it broad like that, so we're really just kind of starting a conversation. We just kind of have very loose terms, loosely defined, but that's how we do it across 10 categories. The first of those categories, as usual, being writing. All right, this play already, like the writing is incredible, like the layers and layers of it to get it to this place. And I think that adapting it to film, they do a really great job, even with those, changes that they do make based on restrictions from what they could show in film for the time. Mm-hmm. This is one of the better written comedies. Like, there's just so much to it that I couldn't give it anything less than a 2 personally.
I agree completely.
All right. World building. World building is a little interesting.
Yeah, this is, where do I put the blame on like missed opportunities when it comes to the sets or missed opportunities when it comes to things that you could show, that you could cut to, things that were taken out, things that weren't in the movie. If I'm gonna place blame on something, it has to be the Hays Code. But my way of doing that would to just give this a 1.
Yeah, I kind of agree because, well, I think that the sets are incredible for what they are. I do think that there are some limitations from the time period that do take away a little bit from the I wanted this to go further with the dark comedy aspect of it. And I think not having like that one character die when he comes in and like drink from the stuff, and that being kind of a byproduct of that, is a little unfortunate. I think that could be another fun wrinkle in there. And I think that they kind of sidestepped it for the sake of the code and all of that. So
the way I would describe it is, you've seen Faulty Towers, right, John Cleese?
No, I've not.
Okay, so Faulty Towers is a little bit like this, where it's like that 60s, 70s kind of British comedy where it's got the same kind of camera work and everything like that. It's all very still, it's all very panning, and it's all very wide and allowing for most of the set, and it's all very contained. And it's the difference between that and the difference between a Monty Python movie. Yeah. Where a Monty Python movie has limitless potential with where it can go and what it can do. Yeah. But this does feel that sort of contained, that feels like it doesn't feel very lively for a movie based in Brooklyn in the 40s, one of the liveliest times in human history.
Yeah, specifically for the setting itself, it feels a little too stagey. Even among what I was talking about earlier, on how it doesn't bother me as much here, it is still like a thing where I could have done with a little bit more of a fleshing out of the specific environment that they're in.
Yeah, comedies typically, to help them succeed, they can be quite lively. Yeah. And the characters in this are, but the setting doesn't feel like it. Right. Unfortunately.
Right. So speaking of characters, that is our next category. I think the characters are pretty easy too. They're all so unique, so fun. I just really like it.
O'Hara, which is the cop that we haven't talked about, who is writing his own play and is trying to get. By the way, the entire time that he was talking, all I could think of was, oh, he's a cop and he's writing an opera. Right. Capra. Policical.
So because that's the whole thing. Mortimer's character is a play critic. So there's a few times throughout this movie where you have different people who are wanting to pitch him his play while he's like not there for it, but he's trying to play along, especially when it's like a cop. So that's a really funny ongoing bit in here.
Yeah. I do think he'd like stop fighting Jonathan to like tell him about like the second act of his plot.
Yeah. I do think the Elaine character is a little undercooked, a little boring. Priscilla Lane does a good job in the role. But
the acting's great. But it feels like she's just there to be like, wait, what are you saying most of the time? Most of her lines are, what are you doing? Or something akin to that.
She feels like the wrong end of the comedic bit of him not being able to deal with like the fact that they just got married, because he's like in this whole dysfunctional place where he's thinking that now his fate is unavoidable, that he will be crazy and that he can't stay married to her. And 2, that he's like, his priorities are not to go on their honeymoon right now. And he's like not in a state to be able to explain it all to her at that moment. So he's just trying to get her away while he deals with it. But her character is just kind of a byproduct of the way that she is written, but I think she does a good job in the role.
Yeah, the ants, I think, are the strongest, like, not as much when it comes to their acting, more so than their characters. It's such an interesting dynamic of how they view themselves and the world around them, that they've gone crazy so quickly in Mortimer's eyes. So, but I'd say the only fallback for characters would be probably Jonathan. Yeah, he feels very out of place in a comedy like this, or in a story like this specifically. Dr. Einstein is a great foil, for like the Mortimer and the situation at hand. But I don't know how much that would have been if Boris Karloff had actually been allowed to
play the role.
Play the role and mold the character as he did in the Broadway show. But
Right.
yeah, it's not enough. It's still a 2.
Yeah. Directing. I've only seen a handful of Frank Capra's films, some of his more famous ones, and he is a phenomenal director. And this might be my favorite of his that I've seen. He does a really great job, like balancing all of these different aspects. He films with multiple cameras, which in the 30s when he started, that was a common thing. That was kind of just how you filmed things. He kept doing that well past when everybody kind of moved to single camera kind of stuff. And I think that pays off for him, especially in a stage play setting like this, where you're in this one location for the most part. So he really does get all of the best moments and he captures them really well. And like I said, I like the way he also captures kind of some of the darkness of it too, as much as he's able to, given the restrictions. But I think that for directing, this is a 2.
I kind of agree. This is something where I don't feel very, very strongly about, mostly because I haven't seen a lot of Frank Capra's films or films from the 30s and 40s.
Right.
But also this, I never got the direction quite a bit from this. Maybe I'm just missing it, or maybe I just feel like this is a writing-centric, acting-centric, and specifically character-centric comedy. But
I think Frank Capra makes this directing-centric as well, at least from my perspective, what I was seeing, because he is that kind of director that can take it to the next level.
Okay. I'll agree with you, but I was feeling like a strong 1 territory.
Yeah. Okay, acting is our next category. I think the performances across the board for the most part are pretty great. We talked about Raymond Massey kind of being a little bit lesser, and I think that there's a stretch of the film where Mortimer is not there. He's not present because he's at the Happy Valley or whatever it's called place.
Happydale.
Yeah, Happydale. And he's there and he's out of the picture for a little bit. And there you do get Jonathan more heavily featured. And I think that's the one point where the film drags a little bit more, just because I wasn't as compelled by his performance, and him kind of leading that moment, that little part in the middle of the film wasn't as compelling to me, but I still think the acting is fantastic overall.
Yeah, Mortimer bounces off Elaine pretty well, but he bounces off his aunts perfectly.
Yes.
That I think it's the fact that Raymond Massey didn't bounce off the aunts as like quite so suave or smoothly as Cary Grant did. So I think that's probably it. I actually feel the opposite with Massey and Peter Lorre probably. Is how you pronounce it, because their dynamic acting wise is really, really good.
Yes, I do like the dynamic there.
I don't feel that with Raymond Massey and the rest of the cast so much.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think he's really good with Peter Lorre and their scenes together. But overall, I wasn't as compelled by him when he was acting across everybody else.
And I'm sure Priscilla Lane could have done a better job, but I think that's mostly because of what she's given. And also she basically just plays any 20-something-year-old from the 30s and 40s. Right.
I think she does a really good job in the performance.
Yeah.
Particularly, honestly, in that first scene that she's in at the beginning of the film, you know, I was like really like drawn into that character. And then that character is not really as relevant to the film overall.
And then that character goes to the only other house in
right across
Brooklyn.
The street.
Yeah. and she's basically thrown there for about 20 minutes before she pops back up randomly. Right. But yeah, I think it's still a 2.
Yeah.
I'd say strong 1 to 2 territory.
I'd say 2 for me. So visuals. So the cinematographer here is Sol Polito. He's a really terrific cinematographer. He worked on Robin Hood, which we already talked about, as well as he does a lot of stuff with that chiaroscuro kind of stuff. You know, he's worked with Michael Curtiz, who's really known for the way he uses shadows and light in his film. And I think that Frank Capra's films, as good as they are in other ones, when they're playing into something lighter, those films are a bit brighter and not quite as attractive to look at, honestly. I think this one looks a lot better, and I think it's Pulido's sense of using the light and the dark and stuff like that that really kind of elevates some of the visual quality of this film over some of even other Frank Capra films, personally. So for me, the visuals are a 2, from especially given the context and the era.
Yeah, I think I'll agree. I was still feeling that like strong 1 because of the missed opportunities with mostly the world building, but yeah, I can't fault the cinematography for that.
Yeah.
And the backgrounds are pretty good, especially for those sets.
Mm-hmm. The sets that are made are really great. It's just some of it I wish they did more with. But yeah, editing is the next category. This movie's almost 2 hours long. And while I do think it goes by pretty quickly, I do think that some tightening up here, if they're not gonna show what they show, could have been nice.
Yeah.
So I think the editing is still really well done, particularly with the comedy in those comedic beats, the way it moves around.
It's just one of those things. If there was a director's cut, or if the Hays Code hadn't been in there to swap things around, it probably would have been a much lighter cut, or it wouldn't have had to like tiptoe around things that it had to cut. If more people were dying, then there's less on the screen. Yeah. So it was going to be shorter.
I still think the editing is quite good, but I just give it a 1.
I would give it a 1 as well.
Yeah. All right. Sound is our next category. I think the film sounds great. It's one of those things where
important to note, you watched the remastered version. Right?
I watched, the one that they released on Criterion. So
I watched one that was 720p, so I assume it was just remastered to high def, but it wasn't remastered based on sounds or subtitles or things like that.
Right.
Not going to fault the movie for that, but I just wanted to let you know that we watched 2 different versions of the movie.
Interesting.
We've run into this a few times, mostly for older movies.
Yeah, for sure. The sound is really good. Specifically, I think with the way it's able to pick up dialogue and there's so many voices going on at once. Sometimes there's conversations happening, off screen when other things are happening visually on screen that I think is really well integrated into the film, actually. So the way that they're able to balance all of these different characters frequently talking over each other and, like I said, kind of almost telling 2 different parts of the story by using audio and visual separately, I think the film kind of handles that really well. I'd personally give the sound a 2.
My take on it is that the sound is still really good, especially for the 40s, but I didn't get most of that, I suspect, due to the sound wasn't remastered. However, the other thing I would say is for something as like horror focused as this, I feel like the score isn't there enough, or it's just mostly plucking at fiddle strings and for the most part to build tension, which can be good, but it feels underused or underutilized.
I think the score was kind of still a little bit playing off of some of those horror films from the time, and that's kind of to some extent how those scores were combining it with some more comedic feeling to it. And I think that just comes down to how scores kind of were more so at the time. I'm not going to say that this is like the best score ever, because you did have those Hitchcock films that were able to use their scores in very interesting and compelling ways comparatively.
But it's not like it was even the Robin Hood score, which is it's 3 years before the filming of this, 6 years before it came out. Even that is so much more different. Yes, it's action, adventure. There's kind of a gravitas to it, but something like this, it feels like the score is just underused. So
I guess I'm leaning to because of the way that they used sound overall throughout the film. But if we were talking about just the score, I'd be at a 1 with it. But how much does that sway you one way or another?
Well, I didn't watch the same version that you did, and that's the unfortunate thing.
Okay.
But
well then, you know what? I'm fine giving sound a 1. So if that's the
because
case.
It's still and at the end of the day, it's still good.
It's still
and
good.
I also I always have to remind myself that even though like most of this just comes down to the personal stuff and that kind of thing, I'm still putting this up against, and I mean, obviously we take into account a slight curve based on the time period and also the genre and the intent of the movie at hand, but I still find myself reminding myself that this movie is going up against all other movies that we will do or have done.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing.
No, that's fair. And while I think I really like the sound elements in ways that kind of stuck out in certain ways, I don't feel so strongly about the sound being a 2 that I'm going to like really fight for it in that case, you know? So I understand what you're saying about it too. So
yeah.
That being said,
it's just one of those things.
Yeah. Our next category being a farcical comedy is what I would say that this is, which we're very popular.
What would you say are some other, because off the top of I'm not going to argue against a 2 on this, but only because I have any movies off the top of my head from that genre. Do you have any off the top of your head? Just some things to compare it to.
I mean, Monty Python to some extent is something like that, sure. You know. Fish Called Wanda would be that. A lot of films from back in the day, but something like The Producers as well. It's just usually a film. Oh,
sure. Like everything Mel Brooks has ever done. I got you.
Yeah. I think that this movie kind of nails that, what it's going for with like, because it's always just kind of buffoonery and a lot of confusion and stuff going on. This movie nails that farcical aspect of the comedy that it's going for.
So it's basically akin to absurdism comedy. No.
Yeah, it's ludicrous and it's focusing especially on like improbable situations and the comedy surrounding that. And the situation here at this movie's core is murder and trying to cover up murders for your aunts, and it's just absurd, but it's absurd in all the best ways.
Okay.
So that's how I feel about that there.
Yeah, this is definitely a stronger version of that.
Yeah.
I'd say this is a little bit better than some of Mel Brooks' comedies.
Yeah.
Especially his the ones that I've seen. The ones that don't get talked about very often. History of the World Part 1, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree.
And it's a little bit better than some of the Monty Python movies. So yeah, I'd say 2 is quite fair.
Yeah. And this type of comedy, like farces, were all over the place in this era. And this one's just over the years has really risen up the ranks of those. So yeah. But, and Capra's even done a few of those, like It Happened One Night. But yeah, our final category, as usual, is impact, which this one's a little bit, it's not quite so clear cut. It was a hit when it came out. It made over $2 million is what I get from everything that I could find online.
The budget was gigantic, my dude. The budget was 1.2 is what I'm seeing on Wikipedia.
Right. But movies just like didn't cost, like the movie made like 2 point something million, but we just don't have that information. What I know from what I could find in researching for this movie is that the movie was a big hit for the time, which doesn't mean nearly what it does today in the same kind of way. But like if you say this cost 1.2 million to make, and let's just say this made 2.4 million, which is kind of the ballpark of where I saw. Yeah. $2 million today is $34 million. Or $2 million back then is $34 million today, over that. And meaning $1 million is like, what? Like 15, $16 million.
Yeah, and I should say this isn't coming from just Wikipedia or just my mouth. The citation for it is Warner Brothers Financial Information in the William Schaefer ledger. So it's coming from them. If they wanted the budget to seem smaller than it actually was, they easily could have done that. So them saying it's 1.2 million, I believe that. Right.
It's just like a matter of like, the context for all of that is so specific for films from this period of time that box office receipts are what they are. And so that being said, it was considered to be a hit for the year that it came out. There's things like in 2000, it landed at number 30 in AFI's list of the top 100 comedies. This movie's been recognized over the years. It was made into a radio show. The play was obviously super successful. The movie is how most people know of it today. The movie is probably the most popular version of it historically, because that tends to happen, especially for classics like this. But I'm also not under any illusions that this was like a huge, like massive, culturally relevant film at the same time. So I think I'd fall on this one being a 1. Just because
I agree completely. Yeah. I also have to give it that slight bump because it is 1944.
Yeah.
How many people were going to the movies, not specifically for the news. Yeah. And that kind of thing. It probably got a decent bump actually because people were going in to see what was happening in the world.
Right.
So and also the escapism, I imagine, because that's an unfortunate time to be around.
Right. The escapism is a really significant factor, especially for like comedies like this during the time. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that it's a 1 in terms of impact. I think the fact that it's still relevant, like conversationally, like this movie does come up to some extent at all. And it's from one of America's most famous filmmakers of all time in Frank Capra. True. And it's one of his most highly recognized films at this point in time. It has to be a 1 just for that factor alone. Like if somebody's
one was always going to be the floor for what this was.
If somebody's going through like Frank Capra's filmography, like I want to watch one of our classic directors' filmographies, you're going to end up at this one pretty quickly around, like those other ones that I've already referenced a bunch. So
yeah.
For that alone, yeah, this is at least a 1. I don't think it's quite a 2.
And I think there's a tangible, like, It's a Wonderful Life, as much as you don't like it, and I probably wouldn't either based on its sensibilities. We'd probably still be giving it a 2 for impact because of how much it makes the rounds and is just basically ingrained in the entirety of the U.S. American cultural aspect of society.
And Frank Capra during this era too, this also is kind of a standout for him because after the war started and this film being filmed before the war but coming out in the middle of it all, he started making a bunch of propaganda films. Like a lot of his films in the 40s are just like these USA military propaganda films. Nothing else, nothing more to it than that really. So this kind of coming out, I almost feel like it's like a breath of fresh air on his career. Because after this movie and then after the war, his only real big hit was It's a Wonderful Life in 46. But he didn't really adapt to the way things changed going forward in the industry, that kind of real post-war era, where kind of the rise of like noir and other genre films kind of really started to take the forefront. So
also the suburban nuclear family was the thing. So we were getting those 50s sitcoms.
Yeah.
So
So I'm happy. Like I think it's almost good for him that this film came out later. It kind of gives a little bit more life to his overall like filmography past the 40s, or throughout the 40s. But it's a great film. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. That puts our total score at, what is that, a 16 or 17?
16 out of 20.
16 out of 20. That's two in a row. 16 out of 20. That's not true. We had Yes Man.
That is 2 in a row.
No, yes, we had Short Term 12. And then Yes Man was not 16 out of 20. But this one is Correct. 16 out of 20. It's, like I said, great film. If you just want like a really funny, good time classic. Also a good Halloween movie, because this is set on Halloween. I had no idea before watching, but
I kind of figured.
If you want to watch something that's
it did show like leaves falling and that kind of thing, so I kind of got the autumn vibe.
Right. But it does announce it at the beginning. I just knew the title of it. I didn't know anything else really about it. I know
also
it's based on
an important thing for the dozens of you that would know about this, but the World Series is played in October. And that's what they showed at the start was the Brooklyn Dodgers, and I believe it was the Yankees.
Yeah, in the title cards, it explicitly says Halloween, which I was like, oh, cool. But if you're like looking for something different for Halloween this year, like you don't want to watch just like your standard horror film, then this is a great watch. If you want something funnier but still has those kind of Halloween vibes to it, then. But yeah, that wraps up our conversation on Arsenic and Old Lace. That being said, you have a movie
Yes,
for
I
us
do.
to watch
I have a movie.
next week. What is
So,
that?
I have noticed that we have gone to some directors that we like and that kind of thing. I'm going to continue that streak of directors that we like.
Okay.
I'm going to continue the streak of us every now and then, and somehow it's our most popular genre to do, action. I'm going to do an action, and most of the action that we've done has been male-centric.
Okay.
So we're going to take a look at the other side. We're going to look at a female-centric action movie by a director that you and I both enjoy very much. You're going to hate me for this. We're going to watch Sucker Punch.
Oh, no! I've never watched Sucker Punch because I just do not like most of any Zack Snyder film. How could you do this to me?
I buttered you up so nicely.
Oh,
Didn't I?
you did. I was really excited. I was like, well, what's this female-centric action film that I may not have seen? I was thinking you're going to say Terminator, maybe even Aliens, but... All right. Well, that's that. Yeah. Next week, join us for Sucker Punch of all things. Thank Kyle for that.
Yes, thank me.
The
for
Snyder
this.
Bros, the Snyder Bros, who we've weeded out
They
pretty clearly.
they finally get their episode.
Oh, they get their episode and then they'll leave immediately.
They'll leave immediately. They are not gonna. They're not gonna like.
Hey, you know what though? I'm saying this now. I'm totally open to liking this movie, and if I do like this movie, I'm going to be completely honest about
I'll
that.
say this because this won't change your mind on anything, or this won't tell you everything you need to know. This is a very polarizing movie.
Oh yeah,
this is people love it or people hate it.
Yeah,
that's about it.
Yeah, it's man. I just watched Rebel Moon for some reason like a few weeks ago when that came out. You did?
I always describe this as I always watch what Zack Snyder puts out, but only because it's like a cathartic experience. It's like a
why
every now and then you just like to be proven right and a director that you really don't think has it left in him.
For me, it's just depressing because like they keep giving him so much money to make these
so much money.
They
gave him an entire universe.
Yeah, and there's a sequel coming out in like a couple months, and I might watch it for no reason other than I hate myself. All right, well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Great American Movie Review. Thank you for joining us. Like I said at the top, you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you prefer us to find us in an audio format. And once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you at the movies.